ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਅੱਜ ਦੀ ਇਸ ਖਾਸ ਪੇਸ਼ਕਸ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਟੋਰਾਂਟੋ ਤੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਹਾਂ ਜਸਲੀਨ ਕੌਰ। ਫੈਡਰਲ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਹਾਲ ਹੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੁਪਰ ਵੀਜ਼ਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਵੇਂ ਬਦਲਾਵਾਂ ਦਾ ਐਲਾਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ। ਇਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਦੱਸ ਦਈਏ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਸੰਬੰਧੀ ਕਈ ਕੌਮਾਂਤਰੀ ਵਿਦਿਆਰਥੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਦਿੱਕਤਾਂ ਦਾ ਸਾਹਮਣਾ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਐਪਲੀਕੇਸ਼ਨਸ ਦੀ ਬੈਕਲੌਗ ਵੀ ਪਿਛਲੇ ਕਈ ਮਹੀਨਿਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਚੱਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਕੁਝ ਮਾਮਲਿਆਂ ਸੰਬੰਧੀ ਵਿਸਤਾਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਲਈ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਲਾਈਨ ਤੇ ਹਾਜ਼ਰ ਹਨ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਲਾਇਰ ਰਵੀ ਜੈਨ। Hello, Mr. Jain. Thank you so much for joining PTC Punjabi.
My pleasure. Nice to see you, Justine.
Pleasure for us as well. Mr. Jain, as we know that recently the Immigration Minister, Sean Fraser, announced new changes to the super visa. So the first question is, what are those changes and when these changes will be applicable?
Okay, so the super visa, I mean, it's going to be the ability to come for an additional 2 years. So you'll be able to, initially, the maximum was a 10-year visa. You can come, stay up for 2 years at a time. Now you're going to be able to extend from within Canada an additional 2 years. So that's a great initiative. The other change relates to the ability to have foreign insurance providers. So typically the medical insurance had to be by Canadian providers, and that's now changing. So these are great changes coming very soon, next few weeks. And we're going to, I think people will really find them appealing, especially because there's huge demand, way more demand than supply for the parental sponsorship program, which is the one that gives you permanent residence. So this is a very good alternative that allows people to spend time with their parents and grandparents and now have a bit longer to stay while they're waiting every year for the regular parental sponsorship category.
So the existing super visa holders, do they have to exit the country?
No, they don't. That's the thing. They have the extensions. Now, if you're getting your initial super visa, we always say you should apply in your home country. But if you're here physically now, then we can actually do extensions, which is wonderful.
So when they get the extension, that will be for another 5 years.
It'll be for basically it should be another couple of years in addition to that. So so the overall period is much longer than it was initially.
Talking about the backlogs of the application, so backlogs is one of the major concerns these days. There are over 2 million applications in the backlog, which is about 1 million more than prior to the pandemic. So what do you think when we can see the improvement in the application processing?
Well, I mean, this is a big issue that I actually just spoke to Parliament about not too long ago. The fact that there were about 1 million backlog prior to the pandemic. Now there's over 2.2 million. It's going to be a major challenge. I mean, they've invested a fair amount of money. So both the fiscal update and the 2022 budget has allocated significant monies for this. So I expect that there'll be more hiring and there'll be obviously more technology. The platform, computer platform, GCMS, Global Case Management System, is getting old, and they're developing, a new platform to replace it so files can move around. If it's in Delhi, for instance, it can be moved around other parts of the world. So I think the processing times will come down. We're already seeing them starting to come down. But at the end of the day, what I said in Parliament was that there were, 80% or so of officers at the major case processing centers simply were not working. So that's a big problem. They weren't able to pivot and they weren't able to adapt so that they could work securely remotely from home. And that cost the country a lot. It cost us in terms of our humanitarian obligations, not being able to fulfill them timely and in a proper way. It's cost us in terms of family reunification, as we're seeing. And it's also costing us in terms of our economy. Canada is highly dependent on bringing in foreign workers, and not being able to bring them in is very problematic.
Exactly. Canada's economy is majorly dependent on the immigration, and You're also a member of Canadian Immigration Lawyers Association, and as you recently mentioned that you addressed the Parliament, so you did raise some of the concerns in the Parliament. So what were those concerns?
Well, I mean, like I said, the concerns were essentially that, it's hard for Canada to meet our humanitarian obligations, whether it's in terms of a crisis like Afghanistan or Ukraine. We had a situation, obviously, with COVID. It's hard for us to adapt and to take resources away from, the main bread and butter, if you will, the main programs, whether it's, the family class or whether it's the economic streams, taking resources away from those critical streams and then putting it in to other emergencies is a problem. So, one recommendation I had was you should have like a permanent, task force, whether it's a war, whether it's environmental displacement, any kind of emergency. You need to be able to have people that can deal with it, so you're not taking away, from others. So that was one of my recommendations. There needs just to be more transparency. We need to have more of an investigation of what happened. Why is, for instance, the TR to PR pathway cannibalizing express entry? So that when the minister rolls out express entry in July, he's saying, look, I wanted to wait all the way until July because I really wanted to roll out express entry in a way that was going to be 6 months. That's why it's taken so long to roll it out. Well, fine, but the bigger problem is the TR to PR pathway is cannibalizing those spots. It's taking those spots away, number one, and you just also have these other crises, like the Ukrainians, for instance, coming in. There's no cap. If you have no caps, then you're going to have a problem because you're gonna have backlogs, and that's what we're seeing.
So, government's temporary decision for TR to PR pathway, was that a right decision?
Sorry, there's background noise. It was a good decision in the sense that there were a lot of people in Canada who had a lot of skills, and we converted them to permanent residents, which is generally a good thing. I'm in favor of people transitioning from temporary status to permanent status. But having said that, there shouldn't be this taking away of other spots. So in terms of the express entry system for those who are physically in Canada under the Canada Experience class, to not allow those former students, many of them, who came with false promises from many consultants and agents in India that you're going to definitely get immigration. Well, the pie is only so big. It's a circular pie, and that's how many people we let into Canada every year. And there's pieces of that pie. And one piece relates to the Canada Experience class. But that piece isn't, even though we're growing the overall pie every year, it's still not a big enough piece to capture all the international students that come into Canada and expect to get permanent residence based on these false promises. So, the TR to PR pathway, when it starts to take away those express entry spots, it's a problem for all these international students that are coming. And we see the suicide rates, and we see the problems with, students, being very distressed about the fact that they aren't transitioning to permanent residence. And we now see the minister is introducing something which they had way a long time ago, which is about trying to pick and choose a month's express entry, picking those certain occupations that they like. Well, I can tell you, the government doesn't like food service supervisor and some of the other categories that a lot of international students from India end up doing. They work at Subway sandwiches or gas stations, and they become supervisors, and then they want to transition. And it could very well be that even though they're saying, look, this is just going to be an add-on, it's not going to take away, I suspect that the government may in fact take whole professions, whole careers, and say, we're not going to accept this. If you have this work experience, we're not going to take you. We're only going to take these types of people. So I think, this is where we start to get into problems. But the TR to PR was a good thing, but, now I worry about express entry and all these brilliant people abroad who are not bringing in into the federal skilled worker program.
Mr. Jain, what do you think? What are some of the decisions government can take to improve the immigration system, to make it better?
Well, I mean, there are people that talk about maximum Canada, and there are advocates of that, where we dramatically increase the number of immigrants to Canada. So I think that would be something they could do in terms of, the reality is, I mean, I think the replacement rate is, 2.1 in terms of, births per woman. in Canada, and right now we're 1.4. So we have a major problem with our demographics. And labor force growth is entirely dependent on immigration. So there is an argument for bringing in more people, and I think that's especially when you look at South Asia and Indians in particular, with the language facility of English language facility, they make excellent immigrants. So we should look at that. I think we also need to improve the system by being more honest with students coming in and saying, look, it's not necessarily the case that you're going to get permanent residence. We should shut down the private colleges who don't lead to, you don't get an open work permit when you go to some of these private colleges. What's the point of that? We know most people are interested in transitioning to permanent residence. And we need to crack down on a lot of the agents and immigration consultants who, are not necessarily providing, as we've heard at the different parliamentary standing committees, not necessarily providing the best advice. And sometimes, there's stories of fraud and there's selling LMIAs and this kind of thing. So I think that there needs to be a real attention on that and a real crackdown on some of that, because, a lot of people come to me as a lawyer and they say, Ravi, I hired this person and I was totally misguided. And I said, who did you hire? They said, I hired a lawyer. I said, this person's not a lawyer. So the problem exists here, but it also exists to a large extent in India, where again, you have people selling the idea of definite guaranteed permanent residence, and it's not always the case. So we need to have better awareness and education.
All right, Mr. Jain, we will continue this chat, but right after a short break. Welcome back after the break. We have in conversation with us the immigration lawyer, Mr. Ravi Jain. Mr. Jain, another issue I want to talk about is the NRI fraud marriages, which is a big issue these days. Looking at the increasing cases of NRI fraud marriages, do you think the Liberal government should plan on bringing back the 2-year marriage rule, which Conservatives brought when they were in power?
It's a good question. I mean, certainly the United Kingdom and the United States have that. And the advantage of it is that, you checking on them in 2 years later. The problem with it, though, is that it might lead to power imbalances where people are, staying in relationships, even though they're abusive or they're not comfortable in those relationships because they're holding on to the person because they really want the 2-year conditions removed. So I think that on the one hand, I worry about that. On the other hand, it does put an awful lot of pressure on a visa officer. And what you end up having is you end up having stereotyping often at the visa office because they're used to seeing a certain pattern. The boy has to be 2 years older, similar education, no one's been divorced, no previous kids, same region of India, same religion. They start to really get into stereotypes. Then there's, like I said, this tremendous pressure on the visa officer to get it right, because once you're given the permanent resident visa, of course, there's really nothing anyone can do after that. You might be able to argue if they didn't stay together very long, and then all of a sudden there's a new relationship, that it looks like it, there may be elements of fraud, but I think that becomes a problem, is that you get into this mentality of this, this cookie cutter kind of mentality as to what a genuine relationship is. But of course, India in particular, it's over 1 billion people. There's lots of different things we see. People from the big cities are different from people from the farming and village areas, in terms of some of their practices and what they might deem to be acceptable. So I think that there needs to be that nuance of appreciation. And I find that that's often lost in Delhi. So there are problems both ways, is what I would say. But I think my solution would be, I wouldn't necessarily want to add the 2-year conditional, because I am worried about people staying as victims in bad relationships. But I do want to see better sensitivity and training at the visa office, because I can't tell you how many people have come to me and said, Ravi, I want to just do an engagement ceremony and then put that as if it was the marriage, because when we're married, our culture is that we join each other. And that's when the girl may leave, so-called girl may leave the family and join the male's family. And that's culturally what I'm told, right? It happens very often. And so they don't like the idea of, her joining the boy's family and then all of a sudden waiting for immigration a year or 2 years later to then come to Canada. So, so many people have suggested this to me, and I have to tell them, no, you have to do a proper wedding ceremony. You have to have all the rituals. All the family members have to go there, the sisters, the brothers, the parents on both sides. And it must be, typically on the girl's side in terms of the location. And then after that's all done, you have to wait until the visa is approved. And it's not something that anyone likes, but it's the way to make sure that things are done, in a way that the visa officer will appreciate. So I think if there was better understanding and a better, if there were ways to appreciate how Indians tend to want to do things and have them, join in Canada right away after the wedding, there might be some way to accommodate that, and also just a greater appreciation of the diversity of the different relationships that exist.
All right. Coming to the concerns related to international students. So recently, Quebec has planned to close the immigration pathway available to the international students who attend the unsubsidized private colleges. But the National Association of Career Colleges has criticized this decision, stating that such colleges play an important role in the province and the country as a whole. So what do you think, how this decision will affect Quebec's economy?
Well, I mean, Quebec is not making a lot of good moves in terms of immigrants, right? I see a lot of people fleeing Quebec and coming to Ontario and other provinces because they don't feel that. First of all, the processing times are outrageous. At the Parliamentary Standing Committee, we heard, I was prepared actually to make some comments on Quebec, but didn't have a lot of time to make them. But I mean, the reality is that they take much longer to process immigrants in Quebec. We also have the requirements of speaking French now as the main mode of conversation or correspondence or whatever. And if you're from a country where you don't speak French, you can be in violation of those laws. So I think we see a lot of people leaving. There's also, of course, the prohibition of wearing religious clothing or religious symbols, and some people, whether they're teachers or whether they're in the other areas of the public service, are feeling that they're being discriminated against. So I would say, but the move against colleges that are not the types of colleges for which you get work permits afterwards, moving against them, I have no problem with, because again, I've seen in my career countless times where they say, oh, this agent in India or this immigration consultant said I could go to this college, and so many students have gotten the work permit, and therefore I will get the work permit. And then I look at the college and I see that maybe the immigration department made a few mistakes and students got work permits where they shouldn't have, but the consultant should have known better, and they should have, and this idea that you're influenced by commissions, is something I find very problematic and a potential conflict of interest. So I don't engage in it. I don't get involved with getting commissions from any colleges. And I feel like I'm objective and I can tell the student, no, this college does not lead to an open work permit. So there's no point going to it. And I've been telling the government forever. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I said, look, you should write a letter to the student in India and say, listen, you should know if we can give you this visa, but you're not going to get a work permit afterwards. I said, at least have the decency to be transparent to the student. But now I've come to the view after 20 years of doing this, that we should not provide any student visas at all to colleges that do not lead to a work permit. If you can't get a work permit afterwards, we should not be admitting those students to Canada, because they don't know. They're just relying, on the agents in India, and I find that to be very problematic.
Yes, absolutely. Last question before I let you go, Mr. Jain. Hundreds of international students are in limbo after private colleges in Ontario and Quebec declared bankruptcy and even suspended the spring enrollment. There are other problems which include labor exploitation, sex trafficking of female international students, suicide cases of international students, mental health issues. So, international students are charged nearly 5 times higher tuition. They give biggest contribution to the Canadian economy, but pathway to immigration now doesn't seem that easy for students. So how do they see a better future in Canada?
Either we're going to, like I said, go back to maximum Canada, we're going to have to create more room for the students. In the meantime, there are some band-aid solutions, some temporary solutions that the minister has rolled out, which include extending the postgraduate work permit. And you know, those initiatives are welcome, but you're not solving the problem, right? You're just kicking it down the road, because then the next year you have even more people who qualify under the Canada Experience class, and there's not the room. The slice of the pie is not big enough, right? So I think the solution for the students, as I said, is being honest and insisting on, you know, more transparency. I think that we could grow the levels room. But then we don't want to lose all these wonderful people. I talk to people who graduate from some of the top universities in the United States, and the United Kingdom, and elsewhere, in India too. And they're phenomenal professionals. Their English fluency is perfect. And yet I can't bring them in. For the last couple of years, the Federal Skilled Worker Program, which is the program for people who don't come to Canada and study first, but are just phenomenal people and phenomenal immigrants, that's been shut down. And by the time they open that program up again, the points are going to be sky high for that group. So I worry about them as well. And I think the solution could very well be that we need to really dramatically increase the pie to get those wonderful people, you know, who are top talented people abroad, who have no connection to Canada, and also to really do something for our international students, because I think the government is addicted to this. I think the provincial governments are addicted to it. It's over a $22 billion industry, and everyone's just looking at the money, and they're not thinking about the poor students and their experiences in Canada. And I think that we need to pay far more attention. For the money that they're bringing in, they should have supports, mental health supports. There should be the supports for women who are exploited, like you said, sexually. There should be all kinds of resources available to students in terms of housing. There should be proper accommodation. You know, all these things need to be dealt with and addressed. And I think that the provincial and federal governments share joint responsibility on this.
All right, Mr. Jain, thank you so much for sharing all this information with us and with our viewers. It was really nice talking to you. Have a nice day.
My pleasure, Justin. Have a nice day, too.
सो कैनेडियन इमीग्रेशन के कुछ मामलों संबंधी ऐसी साड़ी खास गलबात इमीग्रेशन लॉयर रवि जैन दे नाल। जेकर तुहाडा कोई सवाल है या फिर अपना कोई विचार तुसी साडे नाल या साडे दर्शकां दे नाल साझा करना चाहते हो ते सानू जरूर लिख के भेजो feedback@ptcnetwork.com ते। मिलांगे अगले हफ्ते, उदों तक लई मैनू दिओ इजाजत ते देश दुनिया दीयां खबरां लई बने रहो PTC न्यूज़ दे नाल।